Good afternoon to all, and thank you for joining us. My name is Andreas Tulstrup, and I'm a Natural Resources Officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. I would like to welcome all participants to this 13th webinar of a series on resilience. The series is an initiative of CORE, the knowledge-sharing platform on resilience, which is part of the INFORMED program funded by the European Union and implemented by FAO's Strategic Program on Resilience. This series is co-hosted by the FAO Strategic Program on Resilience, the European Union Directorate General for International Cooperation and Development, also known as DG DevCo, and the Learn4Dev network. The webinar will last around 1.5 hours and will be recorded. A link will be shared after the event so that all participants are able to see this presentation again. During or after the presentation, participants will be able to provide comments and ask questions using the chat box, which you will find on the right side of your screen. Please note that participants' microphones have been automatically turned off in order to avoid any disrupting background noise. If users in this webinar wish to tweet on the event, please use the following hashtags: hashtag KS4Resilience, hashtag Resilience, and hashtag UNFAO. So today we will host the first webinar from the series on safe access to fuel and energy, also known as SAFE, an interagency initiative and one of the key consortia working to improve the coordination and effectiveness of interventions that respond to the fuel and energy needs of crisis-affected populations. We are going to present key concepts and terms related to energy and emergencies and protracted crises. We will also present the multi-sectoral risks and challenges associated with the collection and use of traditional biomass fuels and how organizations are coordinating and collaborating to build the resilience of livelihoods by addressing these issues. More than 1/3 of the world's population relies on traditional fuels such as wood, coal, animal dung, agricultural waste for their energy needs, including cooking their meals, heating their homes, and lighting their communities. The challenges they face in accessing clean energy are numerous. They're often dangerous and unsustainable, particularly during complex emergencies and protracted crises. Safe and sustainable access to energy is being increasingly recognized as a human right, essential for the safety, well-being, and productivity of the people in the humanitarian community, the humanitarian community serves. It is also essential for social and economic development, offering opportunities for improved lives and economic progress. SAFE and similar initiatives, which we'll hear about today, address this multi-sectoral issue by working to ensure safe access to fuel and energy for cooking, heating, lighting, and powering for crisis-affected populations. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the speakers in today's webinar. Our first speaker is Ms. Kathleen Kelly. Kathleen is a program associate for the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves humanitarian team. Since 2015, she has been helping to implement the Alliance's goal of reaching the world's most vulnerable populations with clean and efficient cooking solutions. Kathleen coordinates the Alliance's co-leadership of the Safe Access to Fuel and Energy Humanitarian Working Group, a consortium of agencies working to facilitate a more coordinated, predictable, timely, and effective response to the fuel and energy needs of crisis-affected populations. Prior to working with the Alliance, Kathleen served as Program and Operations Coordinator for CLASP, an energy efficiency nonprofit where she coordinated the activities of country offices in India, China, the US, and the EU. Today, Kathleen will present the main problems, risks, and gaps in addressing energy access in humanitarian contexts. She will also present how the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves and the Interagency Safe Humanitarian Working Group work to address these challenges in humanitarian contexts. After Kathleen, I will then give the floor to our second speaker, Mr. Owen Graffam, who is project manager with Chatham House. Owen joined Chatham House in May 2014. During his time in the Energy, Environment, and Resources Department, he has managed Chatham House's research and outreach on energy for displaced populations and the Institute's work on energy use inside the humanitarian system. He is on the Technical Advisory Board for an ESRC-funded qualitative research project at Edinburgh University, which focuses on the energy use of refugees, and an EPSRC-funded project at Coventry University studying humanitarian energy for displaced populations in camps and informal settlements. Today, Owen will tell us about the main energy-related challenges facing displaced populations, as well as the research, tools, and projects implemented by the Moving Energy Initiative to help ensure safe and sustainable energy access for displaced populations. Last but not least, Ms. Cristina Zogni, who works for Cooperazione Internazionale, also known as COPI, will present both phases of the EU-funded Sustainable Energy Technologies for Food Security in Humanitarian Contexts project, also known as Set4Food. Her presentation will include the community of practice on energy in humanitarian settings. Christina is a project management expert in international cooperation and humanitarian aid. She has been working for almost 10 years overseas in development and emergency contexts, leading projects for different NGOs, including refugee camps in Algeria, in Burkina Faso, and in Mozambique. She joined the Italian NGO COPI in 2016 and is part of the Program Quality and Innovation Office at headquarters in Milan, where she is coordinating the second phase of the Set4Food project, a multi-stakeholder project aiming to ensure collaboration and synergies among humanitarian actors in the energy sector. Before I give the floor to our first speaker, I would once again like to invite our participants to comment and to ask questions, typing their inputs in the chat box in the bottom right corner. We are going to be discussing them during the Q&A session later on after the three presentations. So, with that, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Ms. Kathleen Kelly. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Andreas, and thank you for inviting us to participate in this webinar today and for giving some attention to this really important issue that we've been working on for some time. So just to briefly introduce, the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves is a public-private partnership hosted by the UN Foundation. Our mission is to save lives, improve livelihoods, empower women, and protect the environment by creating a thriving global market for clean and efficient household cooking solutions. Overall, our goal for 2020 is for 100 million households to adopt clean and efficient cook stoves. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see the current shape of the problem. This is covering not just humanitarian, but also development contexts. Essentially, 3 billion people still rely on open fires and simple stoves that burn solid fuels, like animal dung and wood and coal, to cook their food around the world. So the Alliance is working to try and foster this clean cook stoves market to alleviate this issue. So to get us started on the shape of the humanitarian problem, over 125 million people are in need of humanitarian aid around the world. UNHCR's number of this, as of this past year, reports 65.6 million have been forcibly displaced from their homes. But this only covers a few categories of people. When you add in the amount that have been displaced by natural disasters or simply impacted by them, the number goes up to quite a higher amount. Excuse me. The majority of these people do not have access to energy for cooking, lighting, heating, or powering. And this is what the Safe Access to Fuel and Energy Humanitarian Working Group is working to ameliorate. I want to get into a little bit of the risks of not providing energy access for all of these activities in humanitarian contexts. Owen will get into some of these a little bit later, but I'll provide just an overview. So in terms of health, the majority of food cooked by humanitarian agencies has to be cooked to be eaten, but cook stoves and fuel are often not provided as a part of standard aid. Fuel can be expensive, and so households may spend exorbitant amounts of money just to purchase fuel and may resort to negative coping methods such as trading food rations for fuel or undercooking food, which results in malnutrition and sometimes sickness. The other health concern is that a lot of these families are cooking over open fires or with inefficient cook stoves indoors. And as you can see in this picture from the DRC, these are smoky fires. And smoke pollution from indoor fires, according to the World Health Organization, causes over 4.3 million deaths globally every year. I think Owen will talk about how the estimates for this in humanitarian settings specifically, but it's still pretty high. In terms of protection, so the most common way of obtaining fuel apart from purchase is to collect. Firewood collection is illegal in many countries for refugees, but women will still travel for many hours per day. In sub-Saharan Africa, the Alliance, based on UNHCR data, estimates that women are traveling up to 5 hours per trip 2 to 3 times a week to collect firewood for cooking needs. And as they're doing this, they're at risk for physical violence, for animal attacks, and also for sexual and gender-based violence. So this is a key protection issue. On the upper right-hand side, you'll see the environmental issue. Since all of you are working with FAO, I don't think I need to emphasize this too much, but MEI, Owen's organization, has also estimated that over 64,000 acres of forest are burned for fuel each year by forcibly displaced families living in camps. And those are just the ones that are living in camps. So this is quite a large problem. Harvesting firewood for cooking fuel also contributes to deforestation, soil erosion, and a loss of agricultural and grazing environments. And all of these increase the risk of natural disasters. So this is a cyclical problem. Finally, on the livelihood side, a lot of families actually rely upon selling and producing charcoal, for example, to make sales. It's often the only source of income for refugees and IDPs, but these livelihoods are unsustainable, and in the long term, they're detrimental to livelihood opportunities for both displaced and host communities. And the cost of fuel often absorbs large proportions of families' meager income. So this really limits their opportunities to do other activities. So we covered the top 4 issues with not providing energy access in humanitarian settings, but really this is an all-inclusive issue. What you're seeing right now on the screen is an image of the humanitarian cluster system, which is the way that the Interagency Standing Committee under the UN organizes and coordinates humanitarian aid. So we've talked about health protection in an environment. Environment is actually also not in this pie, and livelihoods. But really, energy impacts almost every part of this system. For example, so we talked about health. In addition to cooking, health is also a powering issue. If you can't power health centers, you can't have lighting, you can't refrigerate vaccines, and keeping certain maternal supplies is also very difficult. We talked about nutrition already, and protection as well. Protection is also a lighting issue. If you don't have adequate lighting in public spaces, such as latrines at night, that's another gender-based violence risk. And as well, it can be dangerous to navigate camps in the dark. For places that are in colder climates, such as Eastern Europe, where a lot of the Syrian refugees are right now, heating shelters can be very important, and this is a key energy issue that has come up, as well as lighting shelters. Water sanitation and hygiene is increasingly connected now to energy because solar water pumping is one of the key ways to supply water to displaced people. Obviously, you need adequate lighting for camp coordination. Lighting allows certain activities to continue after dark, such as studying or working. It allows refugees to charge their mobile phones, which are increasingly common these days. And as we discussed before, it's a key part of food security. So the issue here is that energy lacks a formal role in this system, and yet it impacts almost every other area of humanitarian aid. So it really needs to be given more formal attention. This might be a little bit difficult to follow, but essentially this is an attempt to show where we are in terms of how energy and aid is currently being conducted. Right now, the traditional approach, as with many aid products, is to freely distribute energy products such as solar lamps, Cookstoves, and others without any particular training. You simply purchase them, you give them to the beneficiaries, and you leave. The result of this is that a lot of products are sold or traded, either because refugees don't and displaced people don't understand the value of what they have and find that it's more valuable to sell the product, or they find that they're poor quality and simply don't serve their needs. So this results in sunk costs and also market distortion for any local organizations that are selling these products. Short-term financing I've highlighted because it's a key issue to limiting the effectiveness of what little energy aid there is in this area. What it leads to is a lot of energy pilots, a lot of sort of piecemeal energy activities in different camps that cover part of the camps but not all of them. And these activities may be successful, but they aren't scaled. So not only is the aid not continued, but it's uneven. And this, if you look over on the right, can sometimes create communal tensions between those who've received aid and those who haven't, and sometimes also communal tensions between displaced people and host communities. Short-term financing is also a key driver of limited capacity and knowledge. As a lot of us know, humanitarian organizations tend to have very quick staff turnover. And when projects are planned on a short-term basis, even if there is capacity building and training, that knowledge may not be retained because these projects are done in a very short time scale. There's no long-term strategy for the most part in energy-related aid. UNHCR has developed safe strategies with the Alliance's assistance for several countries, and I think has probably made the most progress in really integrating this at a policy level, but it's still not a common practice across most aid agencies. And lastly, uncoordinated response. We really have a lot of organizations doing different projects and trying to address the same issues at the same time, but not talking to each other as much. And that's another one of the costs, I would say, of not having a central coordination mechanism, a formal central coordination mechanism. So that's kind of an overview and some of the ways, and I'm going to go in now into some of the ways that we're trying to address this. So the Safe Access to Fuel and Energy, or SAFE Humanitarian Working Group, was initially established as an IASC task force back in 2007 to 2009. Once it ended, first WFP and then the Alliance continued it as an independent group outside of the IASC and the UN system. And today it is an interagency consortium that facilitates more coordinated, predictable, timely, and effective response to the fuel and energy needs of crisis-affected populations. The organizations that you see here are the members of our steering committee, but the working group itself also represents private sector organizations and members of different energy agencies and academic groups, essentially all the stakeholders that are operating in this space. So the working group is the de facto coordination mechanism currently in this space. So the working group strategy is designed to try and ameliorate some of the issues that we had identified previously. We're trying to reduce duplication by coordinating agencies with each other and therefore improving effective aid. We conduct research to develop the proof of concept that a lot of donors want to see before funding energy and humanitarian settings, and I'll give some examples of that in a minute. We provide technical support. So, for example, in the Alliance's case, this would be things like providing support on standards, procurement standards for Cookstoves. Capacity building to increase knowledge and expertise and try and develop some more some knowledge for posterity throughout these efforts. advocacy to increase the awareness of need among donors, investors, and policymakers, and resource mobilization, which is essentially fundraising. So this is the relationships that we're hoping to develop. So to briefly provide some examples of all of this from the Alliance's side, the Alliance, as the co-chair of the SAFE Working Group, along with FAO and WFP, coordinates whenever there is a particular collaboration on response to emergencies. So the last major effort that we did on this point was the 2015 Nepal earthquake, where essentially we held weekly meetings to connect donors with local distributors and facilitated the delivery of just over 86,000 products to the Nepal, to survivors of the Nepal earthquake. In terms of research, the Alliance has done baseline research on gender-based violence in humanitarian settings and its connection to firewood collection. And essentially our conclusion was that more research and more robust research needs to be done in this area, so we have commissioned that. We're also doing a couple of monitoring and evaluation assessments of different energy-related pilots in the field to assess some of the issues that they're having and sort of carry forward their lessons learned. The most recent one that we did was with Unhcr in Kigeme Camp in Rwanda, looking at their pellets and stove project that they implemented with UNHCR. Technical support, as I mentioned, the Alliance helped UNHCR to develop Cookstove standards for procurement, the goal of which was essentially to make it easier for country offices to procure quality products and still have a range of options available instead of just resorting to whatever was easy or whatever was most local. In terms of capacity building, the Alliance, along with other SAFE partners, hosts annual SAFE workshops, usually in sub-Saharan Africa, to educate and build the capacity of humanitarian practitioners on incorporating energy access into their work. On advocacy, we, for example, try to push this issue at the top levels of the UN. The image on the screen is from the World Humanitarian Summit last year, where we worked with MEI and FAO and WFP to pull together a side event addressing energy specifically, and we had some high-level participants in that. And lastly, in terms of resource mobilization, the Alliance recently launched a humanitarian clean cooking fund, which is designed to support the scale-up of clean cooking solutions in humanitarian settings, so trying to address this issue of moving from short-term projects to longer-term aid. I know I'm a little bit over time, so I'm going to try and wrap it up there, but I think it's important always to discuss action items when having conversations like this, so I wanted to provide some suggestions on what you can do to help in this space. If you're a humanitarian staff member, you can work with your own organization to incorporate energy questions into needs assessments that you do on the ground, whether that's including cooking questions or lighting needs. You can attend SAFE workshops, like the one that we are planning later this year in Nairobi. You can advocate for the need for energy strategy and funding to senior colleagues and managers, really just trying to push from both sides to get the aid community to consider this a priority. For policymakers and donors, you can emphasize energy access in funding mechanisms and policies. For the private sector, which is increasingly a huge player, and Owen will get into that, work with humanitarian partners to address specific needs and challenges like affordability, behavior change, and supply chains. And then researchers, there is an increasing amount of research in this space, and I think that the biggest issue with it is that a lot of it is being duplicated, but and yet even though when there is quality research, we don't really know that it exists. So we expect some of the tools we've helped to develop with COPI will help with this. So we just suggest that researchers synthesize existing studies and data to identify gaps, and then also support rigorous M&E for existing humanitarian energy projects. So I will stop there. Thank you. And if you have any questions, my information is on the screen. And of course, I'll be in the webinar for the next hour and a half.
Thank you very much, Kathleen, for that comprehensive overview and a bit of the history on the SAFE Humanitarian Working Group. I'd like to immediately pass the baton to Owen Graffam. Please go ahead, Owen.
Thanks. So yes, my name's Owen Graffam. I work at Chatham House, and I'm coming to you today from this very small little box room, as you can see. So Chatham House is an international affairs think tank. We're based in London, and we were formed in 1920, actually, in the wake of World War I. And I think it's probably important to say those things because Chatham House isn't really a normal player in this humanitarian field. What I'm going to say today really is divided into three parts. I'm going to talk about what the Moving Energy Initiative is and who we are. I'm going to talk about the problem, what have we found so far, and I'm going to talk about what we're doing to help. As I mentioned, this isn't really an area that Chatham House has worked in for years and years and years, but thankfully we're not working on this on our own. We're actually working with a number of partners inside the Moving Energy Initiative. We were set up about 3 years ago with the aim that you can see on the screen behind me, and you can also see the partners in that initiative there as well. And the way I like to describe this partnership is really with the Norwegian Refugee Council and UNHCR granting access to information to vulnerable populations and providing us with a real humanitarian yardstick for our work. Practical Action and Energy for Impact, they're the ones with the real energy access experience. So they are the ones getting their hands dirty on the ground, building energy markets, making things work. And that leaves us at Chatham House. Really what we're trying to do is to translate the lessons that are being learned on the ground into practical lessons for policymakers and decision makers. And that's really where our influence with governments and in policy circles comes in handy, I guess. So, we started 3 years ago, and the project is split into 3 phases. The first phase was designed to build the data, build the amount of evidence and knowledge that we have in this area. And the flagship report from our the first phase of this work is one that I'm just typing in here. You can access that report. That has a lot of the findings that I'm going to talk through in the next 5 minutes or so. The second phase of our work is actually about implementing initiatives to address the bottlenecks and demonstrate new approaches. So I guess we're trying to build an evidence base for change in the humanitarian system. We're primarily focusing on 3 countries, Kenya, Burkina Faso, and Jordan. So, what is the problem? I guess Kathleen's already done a really nice job of presenting the kind of building blocks behind why this issue is important. So I'm not going to spend too long. But I guess we all need to acknowledge that the costs of energy access and provision for displaced populations are unnecessarily high, whether you measure it in terms of finance or the environment or health or security. So the most obvious thing that we noted during the first phase of our work was the shocking levels of energy poverty amongst displaced populations. So 90% of those in camps we found had no access to electricity. We found, or we estimated rather, that 80% of those in camps have absolutely minimal access to fuel with which to cook. And as Kathleen has mentioned, there's a whole range of shocking coping strategies that are observed to try to confront this. So, for example, in Ugandan refugee camps, UNHCR has found that about half of their households undercook food more than twice a week in order to save fuel. In Ethiopia, they found 28% of households sold their food rations in order to buy cooking fuel. In Chad, 35% of households were skipping meals because they didn't have enough fuel. All of these things are endemic. There's obviously a huge variation worldwide. So according to the camp and according to the country, according to the refugee setting, energy use is going to be very different. But the pie chart I've got on the screen now is showing the huge reliance on firewood and charcoal worldwide. For those of you who maybe work in the Middle East or work with Syrian refugees, this might be quite different. It might not be something you recognize, but this is the global picture. And for this very low level of access to energy, refugees are really paying a very high cost. So, for example, in the Dadaab refugee camps in Kenya, our project, for our survey work for our project, found that refugees, on average, were paying about 24% of their income for energy products. That's firewood, batteries mainly. And that's compared to an average of 4% in the UK. So this is a huge burden for household expenditure. And as Kathleen has mentioned, it goes well beyond the financial side. So, as I've got here, we've got the sexual gender-based violence, fire hazards, water contamination, exposure to cold weather. All of these things are crucial. I'd love to spend some time going into these points later during the Q&A. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to what we are doing. So overall, I think you can divide what the Moving Energy Initiative is doing into three structural points. The first is about raising the issue. So we are conducting and disseminating research, and we are trying to build a case for change in the humanitarian system. We're also creating tools and enabling mechanisms to enable humanitarians, to enable practitioners to do their job and to build energy into response better. That also includes exploring appropriate funding avenues for all of this, of course, as well. And finally, we're also trying to demonstrate new approaches on the ground. So we are trying to create markets for wood-based fuels, for example. We're trying to implement projects that involve the private sector. And we're also trying to develop a contract between private sector operators and humanitarian operators that would allow the private sector partner to run the energy assets of a refugee camp in the future. So, for example, in Dadaab refugee camp, UNHCR are running 99 diesel generators. We want to see whether it's possible to structure a contract that would allow a private sector operator to run that better in the future and more efficiently and cheaper. So, let me tell you a little bit more detail about those things. So a big part of what we do is about investigating what role the private sector can play in this area and how markets can be built into this issue. So in March or April, we announced a funding opportunity for businesses and humanitarians who wanted to take up work in the humanitarian energy space. We provided kind of data and learnings from our projects and from the places we were working, and asked applicants to propose possible solutions. As you can see on the screen, we received over 100 applications across our 3 countries, mainly from the private sector. And I think this shows a huge demonstration that the private sector is interested and willing to work in this issue. But there's a number of concerns that are there. We still need to prove that business models work, and we need to understand how projects can be sustainable. So that means local ownership, that means maintenance agreements that continue after the money runs out. There's currently a lot of investment in infrastructure that stops working, and we need to work out why that is. The private sector also still view the humanitarian context as risky. And that's why we put out these grants to organizations to try to de-risk some of that. And I guess we want to test the effectiveness of partnerships between private sector and humanitarian operators. How can they work together? So we announced the winners of these low carbon projects fairly recently. In Jordan, a local solar company called Millennium Energy Industries are going to provide a solar solution for Al Mafraq Public Hospital, which serves both the refugees and the local communities. So that includes a solar thermal system in the hospital's main building. It includes renovating the existing hot water infrastructure, and it includes PV solar. In Kenya, we're working with IRC and Cube Energy, so that's a private company and that's a humanitarian, to install solar systems in 2 primary healthcare clinics. And that's going to reduce fossil fuel consumption by about 54,000 litres annually, saving about $5,000 each month. In Burkina Faso, we are working with an NGO called HELP and EDIS. And there we are going to set up a kind of innovation center. So hopefully that will allow small individual traders such as barbers, seamstresses, cooks in the refugee camp there to start some of their own income generating activities and to improve access to electricity for all of them. So that's the low carbon project, very briefly. We're also undertaking market development activities in all 3 countries. So effectively this means promoting solutions that are more cost effective and sustainable, and it means bringing the local private sector to the humanitarian setting and testing what works and what doesn't. In Jordan, we are planning on focusing on stimulating the market for energy efficient building materials. So we're retrofitting low-income homes in communities that have been affected by displacement with green materials, and we're monitoring the impact on household savings and on savings for government. In Kenya and Burkina Faso, we're implementing more broad brush market development activities which are largely focusing on solar products. So pico solar, multi-light systems, pay-as-you-go, small solar home systems, that type of thing. And finally, we're also trying to catalyze further change. So I'm currently working on a piece of research at the moment, which is about the energy use of humanitarian organizations themselves. I want to demonstrate that humanitarian agencies can make big cost savings by changing their own practices. We're producing a series of toolkits which are going to help humanitarian agencies to better measure their own energy use and to capture energy data in the future. And I guess we're trying to also think about ways that funding can be provided to this sector in the future as well. So there's a lot happening. I'm really grateful to Kathleen for ending with those bullets of what you can do, because I think they're really sensible and a great way of kind of finishing. So I hope we return to them at the end. But for now, I just want to say, there's a lot happening inside the Moving Energy Initiative. There's certainly a lot to do from our side in the course of the next year and in the future. But we're really hopeful about the results that we're starting to generate. So please do keep an eye on us. Yeah, thanks for all your time, and look forward to discussing these issues in the Q&A.
Thank you so much for that, Owen, for providing that overview, including the pillars and the research findings, and providing us with more information on the Moving Energy Initiative. I would like to immediately pass or give the floor to Christina. Please go ahead, Christina.
So good morning or good afternoon to everyone. My name is Cristina Sonzogni. I work for the Italian NGO COPI, Cooperazione Internazionale. My presentation of today will be focused on the background of the Set for Food project, the description a little bit of the phases 1 and 2 of the Set for Food, and finally I will focus on one of the main outputs of this second phase, that is the Unhcr platform. Concerning the background of the Set for Food, this project was designed for responding to some specific needs in terms of access to energy within humanitarian settlements. In particular, regarding energy access worldwide, according to the International Energy Agency, in 2016, the 16% of the world population had no access to electricity, and the 38% of the global population relied on traditional biomass and cooked over rudimentary open fires without clean cook facilities. These numbers refers to the last year, but they were more or less the same scale with when the Set for Food was designed. The situation of energy access is even worse in emergency settings. Refugees usually rely on traditional energy sources such as biomass or kerosene for cooking and lighting, which are mostly used in unsafe, unhealthy and inefficient ways. Also, it was noticed that humanitarian actors do not have well-organized technical tools or guidelines to assess the peculiar conditions of the camps where they work, and to identify and deliver efficient energy technologies. So the Set for Food was designed to respond to this peculiar situation. The first phase was implemented between 2014 and 2015 in order to enhance the response capacity of humanitarian actors in identifying and implementing efficient and sustainable energy technologies for food utilization. It was implemented by COPI as leading organization together with Politecnico di Milano and Fondazione Politecnico di Milano, and funded by the European Union Humanitarian Aid and Civil Protection. The main activities of the first phase can be divided according to three main pillars. The first one is referred to practical tools that were developed to support the design and field implementation of energy-related solutions for food utilization in humanitarian settlements. The second referred to training and dissemination activities that were implemented to promote the capacity building among humanitarian actors. And finally, some pilot projects were realized to test on the field the mentioned energy solutions in 5 sectors: technologies for food preservation, technologies for cooking, for water treatment, for water pumping, and technologies for power generation. The main outputs of the first phase of the project were first of all, some ad hoc communication tools, such as a website of the Set for Food, a dedicated YouTube channel, and e-learning tools. But the most important outputs were, of course, some practical tools able to serve humanitarian practitioners in their work. The main of these tools is the decision support system, which is a software able to help in identifying the potentially best energy solution for a specific case. It is supported by a handbook and a guidelines book that describes the proposed energy solutions, and of course the pilot projects implemented in 4 countries: Haiti, Central African Republic, Somalia, and Lebanon. The second phase of the Set for Food is now ongoing with the aim of capitalizing the outputs of the first one and enhance efficient collaboration among humanitarian actors in the energy sector. It is implemented again by COPI as leading organization, together with Politecnico di Milano. I don't know why the logo of Politecnico di Milano is not readable, but it is present, together with new partners. The 3 co-chairs of the Safe Access to Fuel and Energy Humanitarian Working Group that are the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves, the FAO, and the WFP. And the donor is again the European Union Humanitarian Aid and Civil Protection. The main activities of this second phase are also divided in 3 categories. The first is related to training and awareness activities. In February of this year, we realized a training to some of the most active humanitarian actors as innovation brokers for energy. And we are completing a sort of package of tools in support of the work of the humanitarian actors, developing monitoring and evaluation procedures and an impact evaluation framework that are being shared among some humanitarian actors in order to be implemented on the field. The second group of activities is related to knowledge sharing and coordination, and I will later on focus on the creation of the Energy COP, that is a platform aimed at facilitating humanitarian actors in getting and sharing information on energy-related issues. And the third group of activities is related to capitalization and dissemination activities. In this group of activities, we have 3 events that are foreseen in order to disseminate the initiatives of the Set for Food partners in addressing energy access, and the publication of the scientific paper and an overarching document of the Set for Food to highlight the multi-stakeholders approach and the coordination mechanism in addressing energy challenges in humanitarian settlements. The main outputs of this second phase that will end in April 2018 will be the mentioned package of tools for energy-related interventions, the Set for Food tools tested on the field, scientific documents published, and the Energy COP platform. I will now enter into more details about the Energy COP platform. That is, I think, the main output of this second phase of the project. It will be launched in a public way, I guess, at the end of this month. and you will be informed about it. The Energy COP platform is being created in the framework of the Set for Food Phase 2, and after a first period of testing, it will be managed by the Safe Humanitarian Working Group. It is a global not-for-profit community of practice that aims to serve humanitarian professionals working in the energy sector. It has the purpose of facilitating coordination among a diverse network of stakeholders engaged in providing safe access to fuel and energy to crisis-affected populations. It is designed to be an interactive space with an open knowledge approach that enables to search for project technologies, tools and resources, and other useful information related to energy access in humanitarian settings, and also share materials, ask for advice, contribute in discussions, or create also discussions. So it will be really a very interesting point of connection for all of those working in access to energy. The Energy COP will foster information sharing and coordination, and this is fundamental for improving the effectiveness of energy-related humanitarian interventions. And finally, the platform will be access-free, so everybody, organizations and persons interested and involved in these sectors are invited to join in and to contribute in animating the debates. I would like to just give you a first overview of how it will be this platform. It will consist in a about section in the upper side of the page. On the left side, we will have a database section, and on the right, a community discussion section. The first one, the About section, will describe the Set for Food project, the partners, the donors. It will give you an overview on the history of the Set for Food, and it will give you information about what you can find in the platform, how it will work, and suggestions on how to better make use of its content. So you will find the background pages of the platform. The database on the left side, it is organized in 4 sections: projects, technologies, resources and tools, and training. Within each section, documents will be tagged and linked to other sections when relevant. The tags facilitates the research and the upload of documents, and all technologies and projects will be geolocalized. Sorry, I went a little bit rapid. So the last section of the platform is the community discussion that is organized in 6 sections: cooking, preservation, heating, lighting, powering, and other general issues. Within each section, you can post questions, doubts, advices, ask for support, give support to other members of the community, and share your experience with the other members. So finally, why is it worth to join the Energy COP? As I previously said, it is an open knowledge platform. It promotes networking on energy. It is important for improving the effectiveness of energy humanitarian responses. It is suitable also for development contexts. It will keep you updated about the latest development in sustainable energy, and of course, the subscription is for free. So I really invite you in joining the Energy COP when it will be public, and to contribute in animating it. If you have any question related to it, you can write me or just make questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Christina. I'm sure our participants will be following the Energy COP very closely from now on. I would like to now open up the discussion based on the questions and comments we've received. I'd like to start by taking a comment and some questions that we've received just a few minutes ago. This is from Aruna Yosue, who is in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm not sure which organization, so please let us know if you can. But Aruna mentions that in South Kivu there are many of the risks and challenges that have been presented by our three presenters today are present. Ecosystems are being degraded, and there is limited funding. So that's sort of the situation that she describes. But the main question here, given that UN agencies may come in and they may leave, but national NGOs will remain to tackle these issues, how can coordination be improved without an element of capacity building of national NGOs? So I immediately thought of the SAFE training, the annual SAFE training. I thought of some of the points that Owen mentioned and some of the points raised by Christina and the trainings that have been carried out under the Set for Food project. So I think I'd like to open up this, I'd like to give our three presenters the chance to answer this question. How can we improve capacity building of first responders, of national NGOs in dealing with the risks and challenges related to energy in these contexts? Maybe we'll start with Kathleen, and then we can go on to Owen and Christina.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of capacity building, I would say this is one of the biggest barriers to improving energy aid, both in development and in humanitarian contexts. So, as Andreas, as you mentioned, we have the annual SAFE workshop each year, but it's only one workshop. We can bring maybe 100, 150 people, but this is something that has to be carried forward by other organizations with the same curriculum, and it's another issue of staff capacity and funding. And I think in terms of involving government and civil society, that these projects absolutely cannot be improved without them. Local participation and local ownership is critical because, as Josue mentioned, our aid organizations come and they go, even if they're there now for longer periods of time. It's not considered a good practice to come in and provide aid in terms of replacing systems that already exist. Really, each country, the ideal would be for each country to be leading the process and owning it with the support of the aid community instead of with the community itself leading it. I hope that's helpful, but I'll hand it over to Owen and Christina to add anything.
Thanks.
Owen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what Kathleen said. Capacity is such a huge issue for all of the humanitarian organizations that I'm aware of. UNHCR has specifically 2 people in HQ to cover the whole of the energy operations around the world. So, unless organizations start recognizing energy and environmental issues as a priority, this isn't going to be built into programs in the long term, and we need to start encouraging that, pushing for that. On the second point, yes, of course. I mean, I think these things have to be embedded at the local level. I think more, as Kathleen mentioned, more and more this is considered to be best practice, and this is the way that the interventions are structured. Working through local organisations, working with local partners. That's what we're trying to do in MEI. We're trying to boost local markets so that things continue after we finish. yeah, really just reiterating.
Effectively, the training activities are just some of the examples and the ways in which we can improve capacity building to local communities and local organizations, but also, of course, through, for example, the Energy COP that I previously mentioned. People will have the opportunity, I mean, the chance of search for some useful training that is already online, that is already available, and ask for more advice, or be aware of some intervention or some activity or training or capacity building activity that is suitable for the specific cases.
Thank you very much, Christina. I think it certainly speaks to the outcome of the World Humanitarian Summit as well, which emphasized that more support is needed for first responders, and that we need to link humanitarian and development approaches. And I think this question really spoke to that. And I think we have 3 very good initiatives that can help guide the way in achieving that. I'd like to bring out another question from Tala Kreis, who had a question for Owen. So Tala was requesting more information on the market development activities in Jordan. Owen, I don't know if you'd like to
Sure. So just briefly, the market development work we're doing in Jordan is a result of a partnership between us and Jordan Green Buildings Council and Jordan Habitat for Humanity. And what precisely is happening is we are retrofitting around 40 low-income homes in Irbid area of Jordan, which is one of the areas most affected by refugee flows from Syria. So we're retrofitting these 40 homes, adding solar water heaters, adding insulation, installing kind of energy efficient devices. And what we aim to show is, firstly, that households can save money on their bills. Secondly, that the government will make a good kind of, that energy efficiency is a good investment for the government more broadly. And I guess thirdly, also that local businesses are able to start working with energy efficient technologies. At the moment, most don't know how to add insulation, don't know how to introduce these technologies. So we're hoping that this builds a local market around energy efficiency as well. Yeah, we're also building 5 homes from scratch as well, so entirely new green build houses in the area. I think the reason why we're doing it overall is because housing is one of the biggest areas of social cohesion. You know, this is where a lot of arguments happen between refugees and local populations in regard to rental payments, in regard to utility bills. All of these things are big kind of pressure points and areas of anger and disagreement between those populations, and we hope that in a very small way we can demonstrate opportunities for changing this in the future.
Thank you very much, Owen. I'd just like to remind our participants, if you are able to switch on your webcams or make sure they're on, we would love to see you. And let us know if you're not able to see yourself. I'd like to take a few more questions. These are ones that came in advance of the webinar. I'd like to start with. This is from Regine Koplow from Concern Worldwide. She's interested in knowing a bit more about the aspect of marketing fuel-efficient stoves in partnership with the private sector, and any experience that the presenters may have with this issue. And I think, once again, I'd like to have each of the 3, or perhaps more, Kathleen and Owen on this question, but Christina, feel free to to answer as well. If we start with Kathleen, I wonder if you have any experience on this that you could share.
Well, that's a very broad question. I mean, yes, the Alliance has been deeply involved in helping organizations, cookstove enterprises, to get up off the ground and market in the private sector. It depends more upon what the sort of specific question is. But I can say that some of the biggest challenges that we run into are behavior change. And that's both in development and humanitarian settings, where even switching from like a three-stone fire to a fuel-efficient stove can be quite a big change for a lot of people. It requires you to process your fuel differently. It requires you to sort of restructure your cooking time and how things go. So we do have a set of resources on behavior change on the Alliance website, the BCC Resource Hub. And it's really focused on trying to get the message to consumers that clean cooking is worthwhile for them to invest their meager resources in terms of purchasing a cook stove in the beginning, and picking the message that works best for them, whether it's a health message or about saving money on purchasing fuel. In humanitarian settings, I think the larger issue is really more about making sure that people who receive stoves understand how to use them, as we were talking about earlier. So making sure that maintenance and proper usage of a stove is well implemented. But I think this is a larger question that would need to be addressed a little more specifically.
Thank you, Kathleen. I can just mention that Regine had a follow-up comment on this, and I think you've answered it quite well. But basically, Regine's more specific point is that products that come with a clear benefit for the user will have little trouble in gaining the demand without many promotional activities. So why are there these challenges in allowing the fuel efficient stove to promote itself? What are those barriers? And I think you mentioned behavioral change and cooking preferences and matching users' need with the technologies available on the market. I'd just like to, if you have anything further on that, Kathleen, please let me know.
No, it's a very good follow-up. You would think, that a fuel-efficient stove would promote itself, and sometimes it does. But it's not actually always automatic. People are accustomed to cooking the way that they cook, and cooking is a very specific sort of activity that's been passed down from family to family. So I would say that one of the main barriers, though, is cost. It's still difficult, even at this stage, to make a good cook stove that really has tangible impacts on fuel savings or health, to make it affordable for people who are very poor or living in humanitarian settings. And there are a number of ways to address that. In terms everything from subsidizing costs or granting short-term loans in a revolving loan fund to bring down the upfront cost of the stove. But it's not always an automatic thing. I mean, some people who transfer from, say, a charcoal burning stove or a three-stone fireplace to an ethanol or LPG stove say that the food doesn't taste the same. Like it doesn't have that same smoky charcoal taste. So it's a very specific. It's a specific cultural thing from place to place. So I'll leave it at there.
Thanks so much. I just want to check if Owen or Christina, if you have anything to add. Otherwise, we can go to the next question.
Hi, just one small thing from me is that I guess we have done a bit of work looking at private sector engagement in humanitarian settings. I've just copied one of our publications on this subject below. It talks through some of the different business models, approaches, and challenges that are observed in that particular setting. So just drawing attention to that. But I think Kathleen's covered a lot of them there.
Now I just want to immediately share a question that's just come in from Tracy Kajumba. She is asking whether the presenters could share experience on successful carbon finance markets as an incentive for using fuel-efficient cook stoves.
Personally, the Alliance doesn't directly implement projects, so the two examples I'm going to share are from other organizations. Two that I'm aware of that have successfully used the carbon market to help subsidize a cook stove approach are the Gaia Association in Ethiopia, who have used some carbon marketing to help subsidize their activities. And then also Practical Action in Darfur, I believe. We have both case studies of those projects in a report that we wrote last year, which I'd be happy to share after the workshop. But there are a lot of organizations in sub-Saharan Africa who are working on carbon financing and working it into the cook stoves market. I can also potentially share some presentations that we've done at previous SAFE workshops on this topic in the past 2 years after the webinar.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. I just want to give Christina the opportunity as well, if you have anything to add in terms of experience with carbon finance
can you
markets.
Hear me? Yes, because
I know this is
don't know.
Perhaps in
Yeah. I was just writing to you that unfortunately I don't have at all experience on this topic, so I cannot be useful.
No worries. So we have a new question that just came in. This is from Mustafa Gandour, who mentions that in Egypt there is a huge amount of agricultural byproducts which can be turned into an energy source as biogas. He also mentions biofuels and sort of competing uses with animal feed, and that there is a need for funding and technical support. So I think I can perhaps answer that question partly, and we can see if our presenters have anything to add. But in terms of technical support, I can mention that FAO has been promoting and has developed and has been promoting the bioenergy and food security approach, which is an approach and a set of tools for assessing the opportunities, risks, trade-offs in developing bioenergy pathways and in relation to food security, so ensuring that risks are taken into account and opportunities are exploited without environmental costs. So I would be very happy to, following this webinar, to share some of these tools and websites on this.
If we're talking about kind of biogas and biofuel in refugee and humanitarian settings, then I'm aware of a couple. There have been some issues regarding how to structure maintenance and how to structure kind of the incentives in the right way to make them work over the long term. But I think there is a big opportunity in the humanitarian settings, because of course you have this huge, you're overcoming the challenge of having people dispersed over a large area. They're actually all together, and that makes biogas and biofuels much easier to work out. I guess the example I would maybe point to in the humanitarian context would be these guys, Dissemination. They're doing some really exciting work in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, where they are turning waste into charcoal briquettes, and they're actually they're a not-for-profit, they're a social enterprise, so they're actually then selling the charcoal briquettes back to the population because there's such a huge demand for them. So I've seen some interesting things happening, and hopefully there's more to be done in that area.
Thank you very much, Owen. I think we'll take another question from that we received prior to the webinar, and I'll just touch upon a it's kind of a broad question, but I think perhaps more details can be provided from Kathleen and Owen and also Christina in terms of in addition to what you've presented. We have a question which is simply how does one access funds to promote more cleaner stoves for women in particular?
It's a tough question. There really isn't much out there. You typically have to come at, in terms of getting funding for this kind of activity, you have to approach donors from a slightly different angle. Every donor has a different focus. So for some of them, it's empowering women. For some of them, it's helping the environment. And for some of them, it's sort of supporting local markets. In the past, the Alliance has provided some grants for behavior change, and I think we'll be releasing some information soon. Again, encourage you to visit our website and look at the resources we have on behavior change and marketing. But at the moment, we don't have any funds currently. We do have the Humanitarian Clean Cooking Fund, but that's specifically for humanitarian settings only, and the cycle is closed this year. But whenever we do come up with funding opportunities, we post them on the SAFE website, which is www.safefuelandenergy.org, under funding, and this process will continue once Energy COP is launched in, I think, Christina, maybe September, October, I think is correct. But and we, so I wish I had a better answer, but hopefully when the community is launched, people will be able to share more information with each other directly and develop some more resources around this.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm just jumping ahead a bit here, and we can return to this question. We have a question for Christina Zoni regarding how the partnership
Yes. So, I mean, in our case and in general, also in previous projects that we had with the universities, what I can say is that COPI is an NGO dealing with a variety of sectors. So most of the times we don't have, technical persons that are able to give us the proper tools or the proper ideas to develop the technical part of the project. So in our case, COPI is acting as a coordinator and a manager of the initiative, and the Politecnico, in this case the Department of Energy, was able to provide us with specific technical tools that we were unable otherwise to have. So also because we have a different view of working. I mean, we have different points of view, starting points of view, and it was worthy the collaboration and the merge of the two parts. I mean, it is always a positive outcome.
Thank you, Christina. I just want to quickly add a point to an earlier question and an earlier discussion we had regarding the sort of the barriers to fuel-efficient stove adoption. This is Tracy who just wanted to add a point that it's not always about behavior change, but it may also be a question of efficiency. So Tracy mentions a an example from Malawi, where the stove that's used is so slow compared even to the three-stone fire that people rarely use the stoves, especially if they have a very busy day or a tremendous workload already before dealing with cooking issues. So Tracy's point is that quality, efficiency, and incentives need to go hand in hand. So I just wanted to add that. Now, one more question came up prior to the webinar, and that is a question from Kathy Watson from ICRAF in Nairobi. Her question is, what guidelines are available for ethical and ecological sound wood fuel sourcing? So I'd like to just take a quick stab at that and mention the fairly recently published FAO UNHCR technical handbook on wood fuel supply and demand in displacement settings. This handbook provides 5 easy steps on, I will share the link, of course, and it provides 5 easy steps for assessing the potential supply of wood fuel, as well as the status of vegetation around refugee camps and improvised settlements, as well as guidance on how to assess the demand in host communities and displaced communities, and looking at the deficits and the gaps between the two. We will provide a link to this publication. I will also add that UNHCR has provided or has published a number of publications on environmental issues in refugee settlements, forest management in refugee contexts, and we're also happy to add those publications to our list of resources that we'll be sending out. However, in terms of guidelines for ethical and ecological sound wood fuel sourcing, I just want to give our presenters a chance to see if they have any further information.
Thanks, Andreas. I think we have a lot of thoughts about the use of wood fuel and various options that are out there to make wood fuel consumption more sustainable, and we have produced a report on cooking more broadly, which I'll link to while we're speaking. I think from a tool perspective, probably Kathleen has got more resources to share. Yeah, I mean, I think this is absolutely critical issue, and I know that most of the organisations on the call are really interested in spreading findings and developing work on this issue. So really, I think yourself, Andreas, and Kathleen have the most by way of actual tools for humanitarian organisations at the moment.
We have a few resources on the SAFE website, which I'll type into the chat box shortly on this. But none off the top of my head. I think FAO is probably the best resource on that. But I will say that ethical wood fuel sourcing is a really key part of sort of pairing energy and environmental approaches. In some cases, it's not possible to, at least in the short term, to eliminate firewood use. So this is a key activity to implement in the interim.
So I have one. I think we have one final question we can present here, and it's another sort of a broad one in a way. Basically, this is from Maria Jones from the University of Illinois, who asks, what is the current adoption level of improved cookstoves? Okay, this I suppose from a general point of view, how successful are we in taking up and using and adopting clean cooking practices and using fuel-efficient stoves? And the second part of her question, she asks, what is the potential for completely eliminating the use of wood and charcoal for cooking? So I think maybe maybe I'll start with Owen, given the
yeah, so the first part of the question, what is the uptake of improved Cookstoves? I mean, from the work we've done in Burkina Faso and Kenya, I would say mixed. It's a bad answer, but you know, as Kathleen has mentioned, it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of time to persuade people to move away from the type of cooking methods that they've been using for a long time, notably freestone fires. It often depends on the quality and the performance of the stoves in question. We know that the humanitarian system has a problem with following a kind of procure and provide model, whereby they simply donate what is given to them. And in that context, the quality of the items can often be not too high. And where it is not too high, people tend to work that out and not to use them. So uptake of Cookstoves is mixed, and yeah, we found very variable results. I think about the potential to eliminate wood, was a question about eliminating wood fuel entirely. I mean, I'm not sure that is always desirable. It depends on the sustainability of the resource. So, you know, in some situations where wood fuel is abundant and regrowing, then it may not be desirable to completely eliminate. And again, Andreas, you know more about this than me, but we are in the Moving Energy Initiative looking at whether it's possible to incentivize non-wood cooking sources in places that have not traditionally used non-wood cooking sources. So we hope to be able to report back on our findings in the course of the next 6 months or so.
Thank you very much, Owen. And I believe, in addition to the technical handbook I mentioned earlier, we'll be sharing further FAO resources on wood energy, on sustainable forest management. Unfortunately, now we are running out of time, and we will have to close the session now. So I just want to go through a little final wrap-up here. I want to first of all thank our presenters so much for their excellent presentations and this excellent discussion that you've engaged in with us. We may have more questions from the participants. I don't think we have too many, but if there are any unanswered questions, they will, along with all the questions that have been asked, be transcripted and sent to the speakers, who can then reply. Eventually, we will prepare a written report on this webinar session, which will be published on the core page dedicated to this SAFE webinar. The link has just been shared, I'm being told. And on the same page, on the page for the page dedicated to the SAFE webinar, you will find a recording of this session. And the link of this page will be shared if you are registered to the informed mailing list. If you are not registered, please send us an email to the address you see appearing in the chat box now, which is core@fao.org. Finally, please be sure to give us your quick feedback through the survey. There's a link that has been provided in the chat box as well. And please click on this link right away and let us know, give us your thoughts and let us know what you think about the webinar. It will be incredibly useful to us in order to improve our future webinars. And please look for more information on CORE, the knowledge sharing platform on resilience. We are now providing a link